The late afternoon sun draped the town in a quiet golden haze when Marcus Hayes pushed open the door of the Golden Spoon. His boots were still dusty from overseas, his uniform pressed sharp, though the memories weighing on his shoulders were heavier than any gear he had ever carried. In one arm he held a small box of medals, a silent reminder of nights under fire, of brothers lost, of sacrifices made so others could sleep in peace. All he wanted now was something simple, a meal. A plate of food that tasted like home. A reminder that he had made it back alive. The diner was bustling, full of families laughing over pancakes, businessmen sipping coffee, couples leaning across tables to whisper to each other. But when Marcus entered, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations faltered. Eyes turned. Some curious. Some cold. Some judging him not for the uniform, but for the skin wearing it. Marcus walked to the counter, steady and polite, and took a seat. He gave the waitress a small smile, but she froze. Her eyes darted to the back where the manager stood. Moments later, he came striding out, his steps heavy, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm sorry, sir," the manager said flatly, "but we don't serve people like you here." The words landed like gunfire in the middle of the room. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Glasses clinked against plates. Marcus thought for a moment he had misheard, but the manager's stare told him otherwise. His voice came steady, though it carried the weight of betrayal. "I wore this uniform for everyone in this country. Including you. And you're telling me I can't sit down and have a meal?" The manager smirked, crossing his arms with the arrogance of a man too used to unchecked power. "You can wear whatever costume you want," he sneered. "Doesn't change the fact this place isn't for you. So take your food stamps somewhere else." From a booth in the corner, men in suits laughed. Cruel, careless chuckles from men who had never held a rifle, never slept in mud, never watched blood soak into the ground. Marcus felt the heat rise in his chest. Rage itched to spill. But discipline held him steady. Discipline had always been his armor. He stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. His voice was calm, precise, unshaken. "One day, you'll regret this." And then he walked out, his footsteps echoing against the silence he left behind. Out on the street, a black SUV slowed to a stop. Behind the wheel was Colonel Jameson, retired but unmistakable, his chest still broad, his voice still gravel when he spoke. He had known Marcus since boot camp, knew the look in his eyes now, the look of a man swallowing fire. "What happened, son?" the colonel asked. Marcus explained, his words clipped. The colonel's jaw tightened. His hands clenched the wheel. "They did what?" He pulled over, turned off the engine. "Come on," he said, stepping out. "We're going back in there." Minutes later, the bell above the diner door jingled again. This time it wasn't Marcus who entered alone, it was Marcus at the colonel's side, the older man marching in with a presence that silenced the room. His medals gleamed under the fluorescent lights, his voice booming like thunder. "Which one of you told my soldier he couldn't eat here?" The manager stepped forward, fumbling for excuses. "Sir, it's not." But the colonel cut him down with a glare. "This man has bled for this country. He has buried brothers for this country. And you dare tell him he's not good enough for your food? Let me tell you something, without men like him, you wouldn't even have the freedom to open your doors." The diner went still. Shame crept across faces. Even those who had laughed earlier now shifted uncomfortably. The colonel pulled out his phone. A single call was made. And then it began. Veterans arrived first, some in uniform, some in worn jackets with patches. Then more soldiers. Community leaders. One after another, they poured into the diner until every booth, every counter seat, every corner was filled. The sound of boots against tile was like a drumbeat, steady, undeniable. The manager's face drained of color. His authority shrank by the second as the restaurant filled with the very people he had disrespected. Marcus sat once again at the counter. Only this time, he wasn't alone. Hands clapped his shoulders. Voices murmured, "We've got you, brother." The waitress approached, eyes glassy with tears. She placed a plate in front of Marcus. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Marcus picked up his fork. Took a bite. The room watched in silence. It wasn't food he tasted, it was justice. For the first time, he felt the weight lift from his chest. Dignity had been reclaimed, but just as the room began to breathe again, just as the energy shifted, the bell above the door rang once more. 2 police officers walked in. Their expressions were stern, their hands resting on their holsters. The air froze. "Sir," one officer said, eyes locked on Marcus, "we've had a report of a disturbance. We're going to need you to step outside." The diner gasped. People whispered. Mothers covered their children's eyes. Marcus stared at them, stunned. "You're here, for me." Colonel Jameson rose, his chest expanding like a shield. His voice cracked across the diner. "If you're taking him, you're taking all of us." Every veteran in the room stood. Chairs scraped against the floor like the sound of steel on steel. A wall of soldiers formed around Marcus. The manager, pale and sweating, shouted desperately, "Arrest him." He started all this. But the colonel's glare cut through him like a blade. Started this? He wanted a meal. You denied him his dignity. And now you call his presence a disturbance. The officers tightened their grips on their holsters. The tension snapped in the air. Marcus stood slowly, calm as stone. He placed a hand on the colonel's arm and spoke softly. "Sir, I've fought enough battles. Let me handle this." He faced the officers. His voice was steady, carrying weight heavier than any weapon. "I'll go with you. But understand this, I've done nothing wrong. And one day, the truth will make you regret this moment more than I ever could." Phones recorded. People shouted. Veterans roared. Yet still Marcus was cuffed and led out the door. The patrol car door slammed shut, the sound echoing like a final verdict. Inside the diner, silence reigned. Outside, the soldier sat in the back seat, his head unbowed, his dignity untouched. The camera pulls back, the image fading into darkness, and the narrator's voice cuts heavy through the silence. Marcus Hayes thought the battle was over when he left that restaurant. But some wars don't stop at the door. Some wars follow you, test you, force you to stand taller. And the question now wasn't whether he'd be served, but whether he'd be silenced. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into Marcus Hayes' wrists as the patrol car rumbled away from the Golden Spoon. The street outside the diner was already buzzing with people who had seen what happened, phones raised, cameras flashing, voices rising in outrage. Still, the officers in the front seat kept their eyes fixed forward, refusing to acknowledge the growing crowd. Marcus sat in silence, his uniform pressed against the hard vinyl seat, medals in a small box still clutched under one arm. His jaw was tight, but his back remained straight. He had endured worse: mortar fire in the dead of night, ambushes in narrow alleys, the deafening scream of rockets overhead. But nothing cut deeper than the sting of betrayal in his own hometown. At the station, he was led into an interrogation room, the cuffs still on, the fluorescent light buzzing like a vulture overhead. The officers shuffled meaningless papers, their accusations empty. Disturbing the peace. Inciting a riot. Hollow words spoken like bullets, but Marcus met each with silence. His composure was unbreakable. He leaned back in the chair, eyes steady, voice calm. When he finally spoke, "You can try to paint me as a troublemaker. But the truth's already out there. The world saw what you did. And the world doesn't forget." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. They knew he was right. Outside, a storm was building. Colonel Jameson had wasted no time rallying every veteran, every ally, every community leader who had been in the diner. Word spread like wildfire across the town, then across the state. By nightfall, hundreds stood outside the police station, flags waving, signs raised, voices shouting in unison. Free Marcus Hayes. Justice for our soldier. Hero, not criminal. The chants shook the station walls. The officers inside tried to ignore it, but the sound was impossible to silence. Karen, the waitress who had whispered to the manager earlier, stood at the edge of the crowd. Her eyes were red, tears streaking her cheeks. Guilt gnawed at her, because she knew she had sparked the chain of events with her hesitation, her silence. Now, watching the chaos unfold, she vowed she would no longer hide. She pushed through the crowd, voice breaking as she shouted to anyone who would listen, "It was me. I told the manager. But I was wrong, Marcus did nothing. He just wanted a meal." Her confession rippled through the crowd, fueling the fire, turning murmurs into roars. People held their phones higher, recording every word, every angle. The story was no longer confined to a small town. It was going viral, exploding across screens nationwide. Inside, the police chief finally arrived, called in to calm the growing storm. A tall, broad man with tired eyes and a badge that gleamed under the harsh lights, he entered the interrogation room slowly. For a long moment, he just looked at Marcus, at the pressed uniform, the weary but unbroken posture, the quiet defiance in his gaze. There was recognition in the chief's eyes. Recognition, and unease. "You're Marcus Hayes," he said quietly, as if realizing too late the weight of his actions. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied evenly. "The same Marcus Hayes who fought overseas so this town could sleep at night." Silence stretched heavy in the room. Outside, the chants grew louder, the crowd swelling with each passing minute. Finally, the chief sighed. His voice cracked just slightly when he spoke. "Release him." The cuffs clicked open. Marcus stood, rubbing his wrists, but his eyes never left the chief's. There was no victory in his expression, only the steady dignity of a man who had endured too much to celebrate too soon. When the doors opened, the roar of the crowd hit like thunder. Flags waved high. People chanted his name. Cameras flashed. And for the first time that night, Marcus allowed himself a small smile, not for himself, but for the truth that could no longer be hidden. The veterans lifted him onto their shoulders, carrying him into the crowd as chants of "Hero! Hero!" echoed down the street. It was a moment of triumph, of community, of a man finally given the respect he had earned 1,000 times over. But in the shadows, not everyone was celebrating. At the corner of the block, a black car sat idling. Its tinted windows hid the man inside. His hand tapped rhythmically on the steering wheel, the faint glint of a military insignia ring catching the streetlight. He had been there at the restaurant earlier, whispering to the manager, planting seeds of hate. And now, as he watched Marcus raised high by the cheering crowd, his voice was cold when he spoke into the phone. Plan A didn't work. Time for Plan B, make sure this soldier remembers his place. The crowd was too loud to notice. Marcus too caught in the wave of support to see the storm gathering again. Days passed, and Marcus became more than just a local headline. News stations covered his story. Social media lit up with hashtags bearing his name. Interviews with veterans, community leaders, and even strangers painted him as a symbol of resilience, of dignity, of a fight that wasn't just his, but everyone's. But with fame came danger. Strange cars idled outside his home at night. Anonymous letters slipped under his door carried threats, words dripping with malice. And through it all, Marcus felt the shadow pressing closer, the sense that someone, somewhere, had decided his very existence was a challenge they could not allow to stand. Colonel Jameson noticed it too. One evening, he sat with Marcus on his porch, watching the city lights shimmer in the distance. His voice was low, grave. "Son, this isn't just about a restaurant anymore. Someone with power is pulling strings. And they don't like that you stood tall." Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped. "I've been through worse, Colonel. I can handle this. But Jameson shook his head. This isn't a battlefield, you know. This one's dirtier. It's not fought with rifles, it's fought with whispers, papers, shadows. You can't face it alone. Marcus nodded slowly, knowing the colonel was right. But deep inside, he also knew something else. He wouldn't back down. Not now. Not ever. The breaking point came a week later. Marcus had been invited to speak at a veterans hall downtown. The crowd was packed, cameras rolling, anticipation thick in the air. He stepped onto the stage, his uniform pressed, his medals glinting under the lights. He began to speak, about honor, about sacrifice, about the need to stand together in the face of injustice. And then it happened. The lights flickered. A sound cracked through the hall, a sharp, unmistakable sound. The crowd screamed, ducking. Security rushed forward. Marcus froze for a split second, instincts honed from years in combat snapping into place. A bullet had torn into the wall inches from his head. Chaos erupted. People fled for the exits. Soldiers leapt to shield him. And in the midst of the panic, Marcus saw it, through the shattered glass window at the back of the hall, the faint silhouette of the man from the black car, lowering a rifle before vanishing into the night. It wasn't random. It wasn't just hate. It was a message. You'll never be safe. But Marcus wasn't afraid. When the hall finally emptied, when the smoke and fear settled, he stood at the podium once more, his voice booming louder than the gunshot. They can try to silence me. They can try to shame me. They can even try to kill me. But I will not bow. Because this isn't about me, it's about every soldier who fought, every family who sacrificed, every person who deserves the dignity of being treated like a human being. And if they think I'll stop now, they don't understand the first thing about what it means to be a soldier. The crowd roared, louder than before, stronger, unshaken. The attempt to silence him had only made him louder, his cause bigger, his voice unstoppable. In the shadows, the man with the insignia ring clenched his jaw. The war he had tried to start in secret was now burning in public, and Marcus Hayes stood at the center, not as a victim, but as a leader. And as the night closed, the narrator's voice returned, heavy, steady, echoing across the silence. Marcus Hayes learned that some battles aren't fought on foreign soil. Some wars are waged in the very streets you call home. And though they tried to deny him a meal, they awakened something far greater, a movement, a fire, a truth too powerful to be silenced. His fight had only just begun. The scream faded to black. But the sound remained, the echo of boots marching, steady and unyielding, a reminder that one man's dignity can awaken an army.